Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Thursday edition, the first week of what truly feels like fall, because it is fall. Summer is officially over. Fall is here. Oregon, UCLA, 8 p.m. kickoff on Fox from the Rose Bowl. Oregon surprisingly has dominated this series. I didn't really realize you go back 10 years and Oregon's won, I think, 9 of the 10, and it's like 17 of the last 20 that they've won. This is a game that historically they dominate. And it's a one in which that's kind of the expectation going into this one, where Oregon's 3-0. UCLA is coming off 2 straight losses, one of which at home by like 30 to Indiana. It feels similar to Oregon State. Like, you should show up and you should dominate. It's not a rivalry game aspect of it, but nonetheless, like, you are by far the better team on paper.
Well, yeah, I think it's similar to Oregon State in that, to me, this game and the outcome is more based on how Oregon performs than it is what the opposition presents, if that makes sense. I just don't think UCLA or Oregon State have the personnel to beat Oregon, and that's why it comes down to, how does Oregon execute? How do they play? Is this the team we saw in Corvallis that was dominant and looked great, and the offense was fantastic for 4 quarters, and the defense was maybe a little up and down in the first half, had a hard time getting off the field, but overall played really well? Or is it the team that made a bunch of mistakes in the first 2 weeks, and if it's a closer game than expected? And I do think, I can't remember if David said this on the pod or if he said it after, but UCLA may be the worst team Oregon has played so far in David's perspective. That's what he said. That's not us taking a shot at UCLA. That's the UCLA guy saying they're really bad. And so like, I look at that, and that also kind of bleeds into what I was saying a second ago, of where this is what does Oregon show up and what are they able to do on the field game, as opposed to okay, let's really worry about what matchups are presenting themselves that are scary.
Yeah, it feels a little bit different than Oregon State. I think the top-end talent on UCLA is better, but I wouldn't say that they are a significantly better on paper talent-wise team. Just goes to Erik's point. I have the same exact feelings going into this game. Like, Oregon executes and does what they should. Like, this should be another blowout game. I mean, they're like a 24, 25-point favorite. Like, that's for obvious reasons. Like, they're the much better team on paper. They have played better this season, obviously. Like, if they go in there and execute their game plan, it should be, backups and third stringers in by the fourth quarter.
It was weird with David Woods on the show that he said that going in, it wasn't supposed to be a rebuild year. Mm-hmm. Like, 9 of 11 starters back for UCLA on offense. And yet here they are. This is kind of what it is. It turned into a rebuild. And I guess just diving into the storylines here, like, for me, it's like the killer instinct mentality of Oregon. That's what I want to see. I think they're going to blow them out. And unlike the Oregon State game, like that's by far Oregon's best game of the season. They've only played 3, so it's a small sample size. I get that. But that one, they only led by 8 at halftime. And you watched it and felt like offensively they haven't been stopped, but defensively it's not been the greatest. They kind of got lucky with a blocked field goal in the first half. They gave up 2 touchdown drives in the first half, and you had areas where, like, they're not playing clean. Now in the second half they played perfect. They were unbelievably good. But for me, it's almost like going into this and seeing, I just want to see this team come out firing on all cylinders on both sides of the football right away. Like, It doesn't need to be the first drive, but let's see this team play really good out of the gate and not need a half to warm itself up or 2 quarters or 3 quarters to kind of figure things out. Play a clean football game, but right away, and let's see what happens. I hadn't really thought about it until James Krepia mentioned it earlier in the week. We were walking out of practice one day. Like, this also feels like a game where Oregon on Fox, I know it's an 8 p.m. kickoff, but in LA, there's going to be a lot of eyeballs, whether it's recruits or people paying attention to this game locally. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if we kind of see the pedal to the metal for a little bit longer than normal, just to put up some points, get some highlight clips, and just show what the full strength of this program is. So that's for me where I'm looking at. Like, do you show up right away and do you play good, and then can you consistently do it for the next 3 quarters and play good football from the jump?
Listening to podcasts from a national perspective or watching, pundits on a national stage talk about Oregon, it's a lot of hypotheticals, right?
Yes.
It's like, we think this team can be really good. They haven't played very well, but we still think this team has a really high ceiling. Putting it all together for, as you said, 4 quarters on Saturday. I know it's certainly not going to be the game of the day. There's some awesome football games. And one of the benefits of the Oregon game being at 8 is that you get to watch probably the entire Georgia-Alabama game, or like the majority of it. So that's certainly going to be where the eyeballs are nationally. But if Oregon follows that up with a really decisive, dominant win, I do think that will change some of the discussions, at least of like, hey, they did it 2 straight weeks, because I think the perspective that you see nationally is probably similar to what we're talking about, where there's not a huge amount of respect for the opponents Oregon is playing necessarily, but it comes down to how does Oregon perform. And right now, like, if you're just being objective, they played 3 games. 2 have been kind of underwhelming performances, and one's been really impressive. I think stacking, and that's to me pretty much my big storyline, is stacking. Can this team do this consistently? Can this be a consecutive, clean game team? And so far, we have not seen that, but we've also seen them, I think, maybe turn a corner against Oregon State. I guess that's kind of where my head is at, is have they turned a corner? Have they figured some things out? Is this offense ready to consistently move the ball down the field, get out of its own way, finish drives with touchdowns? And if they have, I think that locally will be a significant step. And then nationally, I think will help with, because the narrative's changed around this Ohio State game a little bit, where preseason Oregon was the trendy pick to win. You listen to these podcasts and people nationally, I think that has shifted. I think people really don't expect Oregon to win that game right now. But you win this one decisively, you at least give a little bit of an opportunity to change some of that discussion. Not that the whole thing shifts entirely if you beat UCLA decisively, because I fully expect Ohio State to go out and clobber Michigan State earlier in the day on Saturday too. But you at least, I think, present the opportunity of like, hey, if this team their ceiling's really high, and now they're getting closer to reaching that on a somewhat regular basis.
Yeah, they just need to show it. That's like the end of the day. That's why I didn't predict a blowout against Oregon State, because I said Oregon hasn't shown that they can blow out a team, and they did against Oregon State. And again, that's not a very good football team. That's what we all anticipated what would happen against Boise State and Idaho, but it didn't. So the narratives around the country all make sense. It's just like you said, Eric, can they stack things together? Can they stack good offensive line play over and over against real competition, like Big Ten competition? Can they do it this week? Can they do it next week against Michigan State? And then ultimately, what do they look like against Ohio State? Because that's going to be the deciding factor of what goes on during the course of the season, is just how that offensive line plays, and can they give time to Dylan Gabriel and everybody. It's going to be, there are going to be some eyeballs on it. It's going to be like the only game on television at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this was one of the perks in the Pac-12, was the Pac-12 After Dark, because nothing else was on. Everything was over on the Eastern Seaboard. If people are real sickos about college football, you can go and watch more college football late at night while you're, drinking or doing doing whatever you want. And so there's going to be some eyeballs. I don't know. It's UCLA. It's a bad UCLA team. It has the name brand value of UCLA, but it's a bad UCLA team. So if Oregon wins decidedly, I don't think we'll hear anything about it. It's like, oh, Oregon did their job. If it's another close win, another 3, 6, 8-point win for Oregon, you'll hear more about it, because you're like, what the hell are you doing? Idaho beat this team by 35 or whatever it was, and LSU pulled away in the second half pretty decisively. So I don't know. It'll be fun, but I still think that Oregon, again, on paper, and if they replicate their offensive line performance from 2 weeks ago, I guess, they'll win this game by 35, if not more.
This is a classic game back to the Chip Kelly era of Oregon football, where they're playing a poor opponent, and all you really can do is, you can't control what people think of your opponent, and so you just blow them out, and you put up some big number, and that's how you impress. That's how you generate the confidence in your program. And to Jared's point, I don't even think if they win by 2 touchdowns, I still think we're going to see that mentality of, hey, what's going on at Oregon? Because to your point, like they're 21 to 25 point favorites, depending on where you look.
I think 25 and a half as of
Did it jump again?
That's what I saw last night. I haven't looked this morning.
I mean, that's a big number. And if you come out and you only hang, win by 14, even if it's a backdoor touchdown by UCLA to get it to, from 21 to 14, like that looks different. And you'll have that mentality from the Eastern Seaboard, like Jared said, that who wakes up in the morning and says, oh, they only beat UCLA by 14. So yeah, it's a weird game. It's one we've talked about like all week. Like there's just not much to talk about around it because the storylines are strange. The talent gap is there, and Oregon should show up and should dominate. Plus, they're coming off a bye week. And I guess real quick, like, is there any fear that bye week slows the momentum down that they had from Oregon State?
I think you can certainly wonder about something like that. I mean, this is a difficult team to like predict, if we're just being honest, because as we've said the whole show, like they played 3 games and 2 have been not very good and one's been really good. So like, yeah, maybe they go on the road and the environment down there. One of the things we should know, like usually on Tuesday and Wednesday when we're at practice and we're about setting up for interviews and it's a road game, they're pumping in crowd noise. They weren't doing that on Wednesday, at least. Like this isn't an environment that is going to create problems. Like that's just something going in. It's going to be pretty empty. And I would wager like Oregon by the end of this game could have the majority of fans in the stands, or at least the most vocal ones. So that part's not in it. But like, could they come out and play flat? Sure, because we've seen them come out and play flat a couple times already this year. To Jared's point earlier of like wanting to see, to see it before you believe it. Like we have seen it in Corvallis once, but that comes back to my point of like, let's see them stack it. Like that's really my big thing this week is just, can they do it again? Can they consistently play at a really high level? And I even like want to see, can they consistently play at like a level above where they played against Boise State and Idaho? Can they make a couple of mistakes and still recover and play really, you know what I mean? Because like against Oregon State, if we're being honest, like the offense made almost no mistakes the whole game. Like that was about picture perfect. Like, what happens if they do turn it over a couple of times, or if they do have a hard time with whatever part of this UCLA defense, which again, I can't really pinpoint like what would concern me about their defense. I think they've got pretty good athletes, but they just haven't done a good job against the run, haven't done a good job against the pass this year. But if they do stub their toe and they have a hard time for a little bit, like how do they respond? So I guess that's another part of this is like, if it isn't perfect, because it just kind of was, and it's kind of an in-between, can they still put everything together and win in a way that you feel good about?
Yeah. And I think that was the first 2 weeks. They made a lot of mistakes. I guess Idaho and Boise State more of the turnovers, Idaho more of just like an overall big old mistake. And like you said, Eric, it was pretty perfect against Oregon State. And honestly, I think they would have scored more points if they had just stopped the run a little bit more in the first half, because time of possession was about the same, but for both of the teams going into the first half, yet Oregon had a whole another touchdown on top of it all. So I think that game would have looked even better if Oregon's run defense was good in the first half, which gives me some type of, I guess, hope, I would say, for that Oregon's defense will stop UCLA's porous running attack, force Garbers into 3rd and long and try to get him to do stuff that I just don't think that he's capable of doing and that UCLA is asking him to do, but he can't. And I like Oregon's defense in this matchup just because of their physicality and their speed on the perimeter. UCLA is going to throw the ball a lot, and if they can stop them on 3rd downs and just get the ball more, like that could be where this game, goes from, oh, this is kind of close in the first half to, oh, Oregon has scored 14 straight points, and now it's 21-7, and now UCLA could be at that point of, we are not the better team here. We haven't been the better team in every game except for one this season. Don't think we're going to win this one, and then that's when the floodgates open. And will it happen? Who knows? Always have to see the games. This is why you play the games. But I do really like what Oregon's defense could do to prevent any momentum from going to UCLA. And Oregon, if they execute well, if the offensive line executes well, I don't really see them turning the ball over unless it's some weird play, like a tip ball or a fumble by somebody you don't expect to fumble, like Patrick Herbert against Boise State. Like, I don't anticipate them to turn the ball over. It's going to be very similar to what it was last year. They're not going to put the ball in jeopardy. So they just take care of business. And I think this is all of our messages so far through the first 15 minutes of this podcast. If they take care of business, if they execute, they should win nearly every game on their schedule, and especially this one against UCLA.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into our prop bets and our game predictions for this weekend. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Looking at the updated list here, standings, Erik's still in first place with a score of 16 and 14. Jared and I are tied 13 and 17. I went 6 and 4. Jared and Erik went 4 and 6 last week. All three of us covered the Ducks. All three of us picked the Ducks to cover, which they did against Oregon State. So I'll go first here. Team prop bets, over under Oregon 48.5 points. I said over. I think this is going to be kind of Oregon State 2.0. We're going to see another really clean game, and one in which they score 49 or more, 7 touchdowns or more for Oregon, and it's going to be an offensive shootout, at least for one team.
Yeah, I took the under. I think this is a good number as well, because if Oregon's firing on all cylinders, that number is very much attainable. I just am going to play a little more cautious this week. I was the most optimistic about the Oregon State game in terms of that being a blowout, and it turned out to be this week. And maybe I'm taking a little bit of a step back in terms of thing like, well, maybe it's not quite as clean. This is a hard team to predict, and I'm leaning towards not being a super, super awesome offensive performance.
Yeah, I went under. 49 points is a lot. Obviously, they did it 2 weeks ago against Oregon State. I'm just, I don't feel the same, like Erik said, I don't feel the same level of confidence predicting that the offense will be that good every week like I did last year. So I went under.
Over under UCLA having 2.5 turnovers. I go back to Ethan Garber's and just the interceptions he's thrown, the fumbles he's had the last couple of weeks, the poor play offensively they have up front along the offensive line, and knowing Oregon's strength on defense is up front. I think there's going to be some fumbles, or he's just going to kind of panic and throw a ball up in the air. So I'm taking over 2.5 interceptions.
Yeah, I'm also turnovers, right? Yeah. I'm also taking the over, Matt. I think this is a game, in part because I wanted to highlight how turnover prone UCLA has been, and it's been Garbers who's lost all 6, but 2 turnovers per game through 3 is pretty significant. It's not the way you want to play football. And for as kind of poorly as Oregon executed early on in the season here, they're nowhere near a 6 turnover total. So that sort of points kind of the context of what that number looks like. So I look at this and think there's opportunity to take the ball over, and with how aggressive and how many times Oregon's defensive backs and linebackers and everybody's had their hands on the ball. I think this is a game against a quarterback who's been a little bit, I guess, more comfortable than maybe he should be to put the ball into tight windows. I think this is one where Oregon could kind of feast on that.
I just went with the under here. I think they'll get 2. I think 3 turnovers in a game is pretty tough to do. But I do think that Oregon will be able to jump a route or 2 from Garbers. I just don't think it'll be more than 2.
Yeah. Last one, over under 5 Oregon players with 5 or more tackles. I got real risky here and said yes. They almost did it against Oregon State. I think it's just going to be a game in which UCLA is not really going to be able to do anything. And it's going to turn into let's just run the ball, get the game over with, and kill the clock. And so that's going to present a lot of opportunities, maybe for some backups, surprisingly enough, to kind of sneak in and get 5 tackles. So I said over.
I went under. I mean, their MO has been to throw the ball a lot, and teams that are that pass happy, typically are throwing the ball to different receivers in different parts of the field, which means that there's kind of a spray shot of where the ball is going, and it makes it harder for people to stack up a large number of tackles. So that was why I went under. So I do think Oregon's defense will play very well in this game. I just don't know if there'll be that many players contributing to that total.
Yeah, I had the same thought process as Eric. Just like they're going to spread it around the field, and it's not going to be like Oregon State where they're going to run up the middle and go face off against linebackers or star safeties. And I don't think UCLA is going to have enough plays. Like I don't think that they're going to be on the field for these prolonged drives, like Oregon State where they had like a 13 or 14 play drive like in the first half. Like that's a lot of opportunities for tackles, obviously, and I don't think that UCLA will be on the field that often. So I'm going under.
Next group, Eric, why don't you lead off here since these were yours? Over under 2.5 Dylan Gabriel passing touchdowns.
Yeah, I hit the over, and this would be a nice, I guess, step for him. Not that he's played poorly at all, but to put up some big touchdown numbers. Not that he's played poorly, but the touchdown totals are a little lower than maybe you'd love to see, and this could be an opportunity to see him light it up a little bit. So I think he'll throw 3 or 4 in this one.
Yeah, I agree. I went over. Just not a good pass defense. I think it's just as simple as that. Indiana threw for 307 against them. Louisiana State threw for 352. 7 total touchdowns through the air. If Oregon's going to really score and put up some points, obviously it'll need to go through the air, and I think Gabriel throws 3 touchdown passes or more. I
also said over. I think that could get hit in the first half. To be honest with you, it's ironic though. He's only thrown 2 a game. Like he hasn't had a game yet where he's gone over 3 or more, and we're all confident that he's going to do that. Over under 100 rushing yards for Jordan James.
Yeah, I took the over here. I mean. I'm going to take the over on pretty much all the offensive props because I just don't know if UCLA's defense is that good. And the tough part with UCLA's defense is it's pretty equal opportunity. Like they're not good against the pass. They're not very good against the run. I do think maybe, talking to David Woods, there's some decent players in the middle of that UCLA defense. There's a decent linebacker there. So there are a couple of good players, but I think Oregon's going to run it, and I'd like Jordan to hit that.
I've got the over as well. LSU threw for 44 times against UCLA. I just don't see Oregon needing to throw that often. And that just gives more opportunities for Jordan James here. So I think he'll go over 100. He's sneaky, had a good season so far this year. His stats probably aren't maybe what some people expected, but he's still been pretty darn good. And I think if Oregon's offensive line they've really found a rhythm and a go-to, I think that James could really benefit from that.
I think Jordan James is going to break a long one in this game.
He's been close.
So I'm going to go over. I think to Eric's point, like they're terrible against the run or the pass. So it really doesn't matter for Oregon. And that goes to their bread and butter, which to me is deep down, they want to run the ball. And I would be surprised if we see 2 guys go over 75, 80 yards in this game rushing the football. So I'm taking Jordan James over. Over under 1.5 Oregon players attempt a pass, meaning Dante Moore throws a pass.
Yeah, it means that or they have a trick play, which is actually kind of low-key the more fun outcome, I guess. Like Tez has a receiver. Tez throws it to Trayshawn for a touchdown. Actually, who do we think would actually be the best at throwing a pass among Oregon's non-quarterbacks? Just a really brief aside. Who would you pick? Is there somebody that stands out for that?
Trayshawn.
I'm going with Tez.
I feel like Tez has been around Bo so much that he better know how to throw a football like pretty well, right? I don't know. That was also where my head went. But Trayshawn, I would be interesting to see. Patrick Herbert maybe is a good pick as well for just a guy who's been around quarterbacks. I actually went under though. You'll see my score prediction. I think Oregon wins pretty decisively, but I'm not sure we see Dante Moore enter, and if we do, it might just be for Niels. So I took the under.
I took the over just because why not?
I think this could be a petty game and get Dante Moore into the game and let him air it out for a series or 2. So I think it's going to be over. All right, Jared, you can lead us off here. Yes or no, Bryce Betcher will lead the team in tackles?
I said no. I think his reign of terror on the Oregon defense is going to end as the leading tackler. I still think he'll be there on almost every single play, but Kind of like to our points earlier about the 5 or more Oregon players at 5 tackles. There's going to be more opportunities for other guys to lead the team in tackles. So I'm going to say no.
Feels like a Kobe Savage or Kaishim game more to me, of like they're going to be throwing a lot. Now, I will say Bryce has made a lot of tackles in coverage and has been really good at finishing plays off of passes. But I'll lean towards a defensive back just because I think the way this game will go is UCLA will pretty quickly abort its run game and will be forced to throw it a lot. And because of that, you're going to see the defensive backs around the football a little more than linebackers.
I'm going to be the other direction. I'm going to say over, simply because he's done it 3 games in a row, and kind of to the point of like, until someone else proves that they can take the spot from him, if this is a pick, I might pick him every time until he's proven otherwise. But he's been really good. And to your point, Eric, like he's improved in coverage this season. He's still not like elite, but he's gotten better. I also wonder just like how much do we see of Bossa? How much do we see of Justin Jacobs? And could we see kind of an easy, fair rotation of snaps distributed across the board of all 4 guys that they kind of play at that spot? But I'm going over. Or going, yes. Over under Derek Harmon tackles for loss set at 1.5.
I'm going over here. I think I was the only one to go over to spoil the rest of them. But UCLA's offensive line is pretty tough. They're averaging 60 yards a game on the ground, on like 2.7 yards a carry. So maybe, and Derek Harmon is quite a game wrecker. He's the leader in the NCAA in pressures from an interior defensive lineman. Their guard play at UCLA is bad. This feels like a really good combination for Derek Harmon to do some damage on the ground. So I got him at the over.
When you said UCLA's offensive line is tough, for a second I was thinking that was like in a good way, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is new information for me." Yeah, I agree with that. You make a very compelling case. I'm going under on this one, more so just because I think it's possible like they actually like put so much effort in Derek that somebody else gets home a little bit. I do think Oregon will probably have. I don't know. There's a chance they have a lot of disruptive plays here, whether that be tackle for losses or sacks. I'll pick someone other than Derek to get them this week.
I think if it was Jordan Birch or Mateo or Tatum, someone off the edge, it would have been an automatic yes for me. But I just feel like Garber's escapability might lead him to getting away from Harmon, but then getting sacked by somebody else. Harmon could be the cause of 4 sacks on Saturday and get 0 credit, very much like what Caldwell did week 1 against Idaho, where like he was very disruptive, just didn't get anything. So I went under on that number. Dante Manning, 1.5 pass breakups.
Yeah, I went over here. I just think UCLA is going to throw the ball a ton, and Dante is going to be, bare minimum splitting time with Nico Reed on the opposite side of Jabbar Muhammad. So that's just going to give him more opportunities. I kind of just went with the ideas like more is better. Like they're going to throw the ball a lot. And I'm going to pick a cornerback who is definitely not as good as Jabbar Muhammad, who might be picked on more. So more chances for more pass breakups.
I also went over, and for very similar logic to Jared. I just think the ball's in the air a lot this game. Dante will have some opportunities. He's been pretty good so far this season. I think he has another strong showing. I
just said under. I don't really have like just a gut feel of I just don't know if he's going to do it. So I said under. Score predictions. I guess I'll go first. Oregon 56, UCLA 14. Very similar to last week. I think the start will be better for Oregon. We might see a touchdown or maybe 2 from UCLA's backups against Oregon's backups. I think they put together their best game through 4 games. Their second straight, really good performance. I think they dominate in all phases of the game. They've got the better players basically at every position group. I'll say it maybe 2 or 3. And it's going to be one in which, they go down to LA and when they wear cool uniforms, which they're doing this weekend, it's typically a kind of a blowout performance by Oregon, regardless of coach, regardless of team. And this just feels like, one of those weeks where they're going to go down, they're going to play clean, and they're going to kind of dominate this game.
I like the uniforms factoring into the predictions, Matt. I like that. That's a good calculus for doing this. I think Oregon's going to win and win by a lot. I have 38-17. I know that's not as decisively as Matt, and I think it's pretty close to what Jared has. I don't remember exactly your score, but my thinking is, and I kind of suggested it towards the end, right before we went to break, of like, I think Oregon's going to play much better than they played the first 2 weeks, but still make a mistake or two here that kind of stops you from coming away feeling like, oh, that was Oregon State 2.0. Like, I think the defense is going to play maybe better than the offense, but the offense is still, obviously, if they're scoring 38 points, is going to do its job. So I just look at it to be a performance where you're like, okay, they played significantly better than they did the first 2 weeks, but maybe it's not quite as well as they played in Corvallis. You win 21 points. That's a decisive win. That feels good, but it's maybe one where you're kind of like, there's a possibility it goes to Matt's point where it's just a total, complete ass kick. I think it's kind of a little bit more centered than that.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle too. I have Oregon winning 42-17. So again, close to Erik's score. I'm in the middle of what this team really is. Yeah, I think it's still simple like that. Like, great job for beating Oregon State by 1 million. Like, that's what you should have done. And it's just happened to come in the third game of the season after looking pretty poor in the first 2 games of the season against Idaho and Boise State. I think Boise State's a good program, but still, I just, I need to see it more. I think that Oregon can win decisively in this game. I think they can win this game by 45 points if everything goes correctly, because there's such a talent disparity on these two rosters that it is very clear that Oregon is by far the better team. And there's a talent disparity between them and almost everybody on the schedule. And that's what I keep talking about, is like, they need to execute their game and do their job, and the offensive line needs to hold up, and they should win a majority of the season's games, and this one included. So I just need to see it more. I still think that they're going to win by a bunch. I still am predicting that. But if I see it and they are immediately executing on both sides of the ball and stopping the run, holding them to maybe a first down or 2 on the drives, on defensive drives, and then the offensive line is rotating, is pulling, is blocking people, is giving Dylan Gabriel time, the game's over. It's going to be really quick to figure out, like, if the real Oregon is here. And they were the real Oregon against Oregon State. They had a bye week. Maybe that messes with momentum. Maybe it doubles down on their momentum, where it's like, okay, we played really well. We got a week to heal. Guys are going to come back more healthy, blah, blah, blah. And maybe they just come out and have an absolute ass kicking in front of 35 fans at the Rose Bowl. And there'll be a lot of people watching, but I just need to see it again. But again, I still have them winning by a bunch.
I was going to say, it probably feels like we have them not winning by a lot, but 21 and 26 points, I think, or 25, whatever you had, Jared, those still qualify as blowouts to me. So I think we all think they're going to blow out UCLA. It's just Matt probably thinks Matt's prediction is more like the blowout, like the real ass kick.
I think that there's a factor here that David brought up. I think it was on the podcast, not off it, but like the give up factor with UCLA. Where they got embarrassed at home 2 weeks ago by Indiana, and they went to LSU and they didn't score in the second half. And I know it was close through 3, but they still lost by 17 points on the road. And not scoring in a game in which you were tied at the half is pretty demoralizing. And what happens if Oregon does come out and plays well right away and puts up 28 points in the first half? What kind of fight does this UCLA team have? I legitimately think that's going to be a case, because he pointed it out. Like, if you look at the schedule, like I think they go to Penn State next week and then another team the following week, and it just, the losses just start stacking, and it becomes a full on, like, they're not going to be good. We're not going to get out of this. We're stuck. Here we are. We're terrible. Just shut it down. Like, I'm curious if that plays a factor. It's crazy because it's still September, but I think that could happen as well.
I think that's well within the realm of possibilities. I think we all think if Oregon plays its best game, this game is going to be totally lopsided, and it's just a matter if they do. And I again, 21 points to me, I still think that represents like they played pretty darn well in that game. It's just maybe there's a spot here or there. There's a drive where they turn it over in the red zone, or there's a penalty that pushes them out of, pushes them into like a longer field goal and they miss it. Just those kind of things are the things I'm just kind of wary of, because you're right, Matt. Like if this is a game where Oregon comes out and plays its best, probably don't expect UCLA to match them even close, punch to punch. And if it gets away from them early, do they just completely fold, which is probably what would happen. I'm just not sure they're going to quite create that sort of separation.
Yeah. All right, it's going to do it for us on this edition of the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Next time you hear from us, it will be a very early Sunday morning podcast breaking down the outcome of Oregon at UCLA. But until then, thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. You've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.